Next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 3759. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 3759, number 13 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to energy.
Representative Fabian, there's an author's amendment. Do you wish to offer that amendment at this time?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that's what I'd like to do.
Representative Fabian offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Fabian moves to amend House File number 3759 as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
Call upon the author of the amendment from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think the amendment is being handed out. Do you want me to wait, Mr. Speaker?
Representative Fabian, you can go ahead and present the amendment, but
Thank you,
we
Mr.
will
Speaker.
not vote on it until all members have had a chance to review the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is the Line 3 replacement bill that I've been carrying. This is what the amendment is going to do is try to bring it more in line with where the current status is with regards to Line 3 and some of the actions that have been going on. This is a bill, as I've said in committee before, that has very, very strong support in my part of the state and across northern Minnesota. The Line 3 replacement is something that is being required by the federal government during the Obama years. They told Enbridge that you must replace this line. So then the process started about 4 years ago to try to come up with a plan and a route and so forth to do that. The environmental impact statement that was done by the Department of Commerce has been completed. It has been deemed complete and adequate. Recently, the administrative law judge determined that the certificate of need was valid and that there was a need for this in terms of the oil getting to market and the company making a good decision to transport the oil. Now, the third part of it is the route. And what we've done here is allowed Enbridge to use their preferred route, which avoids the tribal reservation land. The tribes have spoken loud and clear. They do not want the pipeline in the current easement that it's in. The alternative route that Enbridge has come up with has been through the EIS process. It's been approved. It's adequate. And what this bill is going to do once we adopt the amendment is allow the Enbridge to work with the PUC to determine if there are some minor adjustments that need to be made in the preferred route and work around those and require that the permit be issued for the pipeline construction by the end of the year.
Discussion to the A1 amendment. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the A1 amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. No. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments to the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File number 3759 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. Discussion to House File 3759 as amended. Member from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Everyone agrees that the Public Utilities Authority is going to make a decision in June about the need for this Enbridge Line 3. So there's only one reason for this bill, Representative Fabian. You think that the Public Utilities Authority will find there's no need for the pipeline, and you want to build it anyway. So this bill says, Enbridge, you can build the Line 3 whether or not it's needed in Minnesota. Bottom line is a vote for this bill says that Enbridge is more important than Minnesota. This should be a bright red vote.
Discussion. Member from Aiken, Representative Lueck.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers and members. I would encourage a green vote on this matter. It's not a question of whether we build a pipeline or not. It's a question of whether or not folks that don't live in my part of the state want to run crude oil trains every hour through my small cities endanger the public welfare, the public good, run right by my schools, my courthouses, my fire departments. So this concept that, well, we're just going to push this off, we don't need it, unfortunately, the facts don't show that. But this is about public safety, really basic stuff. And I want to thank Chair Fabian for bringing this forward. We wait and wait and wait on this. That pipeline that we're talking about replacing, that the Obama administration cited long ago that needed to be replaced, is an old pipeline. And old things get cranky. And we can't look anybody in the eye and say we're honestly protecting the environment when we're going to allow that pipeline to continue to operate now at half capacity because it's old. We need to get on with this. We put men on the moon. For goodness sakes, Minnesota can certainly replace a pipeline. Thank you, members.
Member from Dakota, Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this company already has a pipeline. How many chances are they going to get to acquire Minnesota property to impact Minnesotans? I mean, this makes no sense. Why can't they just redo the property work on the property that they already have? I mean, we've gone through this again and again. And the other thing is, this is not even a Minnesota company. It's not even a United States company. And little of what is being done is truly going to be influential to Minnesotans. I urge a no vote.
Member from Roseville, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Mason, the reason why we're not going to put it in the track where it currently is, or in the easement where it currently is because the tribes don't want it there and Enbridge doesn't want it there. So because of that resistance, what we're doing is they have already determined long ago an alternative route. When the pipe comes through out of Manitoba across a portion of North Dakota and then comes into Minnesota, when it gets to the Clearbrook terminal from there, instead of continuing to follow the existing easement all the way over to Duluth Superior, because of the current easement that is there where Line 3 currently is, it's going across the tribal reservation lands. And so what they've done from Clearbrook is headed straight south, in essence straight south, far enough so then that they can turn and go basically straight east so that they can get to Duluth Superior and avoid those tribal reservation lands. And as to the point of this being a company that is from Canada or wherever, what difference does that make, folks? I know my former students are working for Enbridge, Minnesotans, okay? Teamsters, pipe fitters, great union jobs. I mean, we have young men and women working for this company, and they have got tremendous income. They've got really good benefits. They've got a company that really takes good care of them. We heard the testimony in Thief River Falls about one of the workers for Enbridge whose family was going through a difficult pregnancy, and the employee had run out of their sick leave, and her superiors at Enbridge said, you go and take all the time that you need, get your family back to where you feel comfortable, and when you're ready, you come back and let us know, and you're going to go back to work. So, and to Representative Wagenius, who said that the only reason for the bill, well, members, no, that's not true. The reason for this bill is because the safest, most efficient, most cost-effective way to move products is in a pipeline. If you want more railroad cars coming through your community, if you want more railroads cars going across the bridge in Wool Road, Minnesota, or Baudette, Minnesota, or in International Falls, Minnesota, and risk having those cars leave the track and wind up in the Warroad River or the Rainy River, and now we're going to have a spill and that water is going to get into the Lake of the Woods, I don't think we want that. The more pressure we put on the rail, the less likely we are going to be able to move more products to market, whether it's grain or it's cars. How many of you have ever worked in a warehouse? I have. You'd be absolutely amazed at Representative Clark Johnson and I probably worked at the same one in Fargo, West Fargo. But You'd be amazed at what's shipped on rail. Everything from Folgers coffee and Charmin bathroom tissue to plywood and everything in between. The more trains that are moving with oil cars, the less we are going to be able to move all of those other products. And we've heard Representative Hornstein and other members talk about how important roads and bridges are and maintaining them and wear and tear. Well, guess what? If you want more trucks driving on your roads, then don't vote for the pipeline. I think that this pipeline is a tremendous asset to the state of Minnesota. I didn't want to print it because the routing numbers and stuff were on the check, but I got an image of a check, okay? An image of a check sent to me by Marshall County, Minnesota for calendar year 2017. And the check from Enbridge to Marshall County was for just over $4 million. $4 million. And this is in a small rural county. The #1 source of property tax revenue in Kittson County and in Marshall County and in Pennington County is from the pipeline company. So the idea that somehow this is an evil corporation that doesn't care about Minnesotans and so forth, Representative Mason, I respect you, but the notion is completely false, members. This is a really good company. Go up to Viking, Minnesota, which is halfway between Thief River Falls and Newfoundland, and talk to the people in the community of Viking and how important Enbridge and the pipelines are to their communities. Go up and ask the superintendents of schools all across northern Minnesota how important Enbridge is to their school finances. Talk to the townships. Talk to maybe the hospital districts and anybody else who is a taxing entity. This is a really good company that goes about its business in an extremely safe and reliable way. And why are we not going to put the pipe back in the ground where the old one came out from? Because it's going to risk the structural integrity of the other pipes. If you understand how the pipeline easement is arranged, there are a number of pipes in the ground. I think it's 6. And line 3 is one of the inner pipes. If they're going to be traversing across the other pipes that are there to get into the center, there's only like 10 or 12 feet between them. So you're going to be having dump trucks, track hose, who knows what other kind of heavy equipment is going to be traveling over the tops of these pipes. And some of the pipes are fairly close to the surface of the ground. Enbridge has said this is not a safe way to do this. We do not want to risk the structural integrity of the other pipes. So there's a lot more to this, the reason for the bill, than simply the one thing that Representative Wagenia said. And Representative Mason, I hope that I answered your questions. Thank you. I'm sure the debate will continue.
Member from Polk, Representative Keel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I will add to what Representative Fabian said in that I would like to point out that when the rails are moving oil across northwestern Minnesota, it is not moving commodities. It really, about 3-4 years ago, we had a huge problem trying to get crop out, product inputs in, and it goes to really the challenges in agricultural areas of Minnesota. When I'm trying to sell my wheat or soybeans, my elevator says, well, sorry today, Deb, you can't sell it because we don't have any place to put it. There's no rail that's coming because they're backed up. And oh, by the way, I can't give you the high price that you can get now. And then I end up waiting for a low price. It does not help me to market my crop in a efficient manner and be able to get it out and into the market where it can be used. So it really becomes a cumbersome problem when the rails are full of oil instead of the ability to move our commodities out of the district. And by the way, I will also point out that we're having trouble getting fertilizer in this spring. And that also becomes part of the problem when we're doing a timely planting is happening, has to be happening in a quick manner. And those inputs are not getting to the agricultural areas like they need to in a quick manner. So rail is important for agriculture in Minnesota.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. I just want to address a couple of issues that have come up here on the floor. The first one relates to the issue of trains versus pipelines. And let me say that we have tried to address both of these issues here in the legislature. In 2014, we had an oil transportation safety bill that addressed both pipelines and crude oil trains because there's problems with both. And the rail industry and the pipeline industry lobbied hard against the modest changes that we wanted to make in terms of safety. So there are issues with both. The pipeline industry, in fact, lobbied against a simple provision that would require them within an hour of a spill to contact first responders by phone. How difficult is that? And to have someone on the scene 3 hours later. So I believe that we have safety issues with both. And there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that on this particular route, that the oil that would be traveling by pipeline would in fact all be traveling by train. This is a particular route with a specific market and a specific refinery in mind. And when the Keystone XL pipeline was canceled, there was no appreciable increase in both construction of rail infrastructure along and near that line, and in fact, that particular oil moving by rail. So there's no evidence to suggest that. And in fact, we've had, even in the last couple of years in this legislature, I've put forward simple amendments to have a couple of rail inspectors, additional rail inspectors, because I share the concerns about rail safety. The other side of the aisle wouldn't even do that. So there are both problems with oil trains and with pipelines, and both industries have lobbied hard against basic safety regimens. Now, there are many reasons why we should oppose this bill. First of all, we've had a lot of citizen involvement in this process from both sides. And if the legislature sets a precedent that we are going to be the permitting agency and simply order a permit to be completed, we've negated all sorts of public process, all sorts of precedents that really is designed to make sure that the facts are out there and that the Public Utilities Commission has those facts before them when they're making a decision. And we've had a lot of evidence to suggest that there is the potential for a large spill in a Mississippi River tributary that could impact drinking water for millions of people. We've had a lot of evidence to suggest that both treaty rights are affected both directly and through the ceded territories, which I think others will talk about. And we've had a lot of evidence in this process from the Department of Commerce that this pipeline isn't really needed. But the thing that bothers me the most about this legislation, since we're talking about the PUC process, is that Enbridge has spent $5 million in the last year lobbying the Public Utilities Commission. This is unprecedented. $5 million. And so we have a very, very lopsided situation taking place where one company has put so much resource into lobbying one particular agency. I think that's unhealthy for our democracy. It's unhealthy when we have big money in electoral politics. But now we have big corporate money trying to influence one decision in one state agency. That's wrong. I urge a red vote.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Smith D.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, a couple of points to consider. On everyone's desk is a note from the Association of Minnesota Counties representing each of the 87 counties in our beloved state. They write that they support this new line. in part because there's an increase in safety, there's an increase in reliability, and there's this line represents an important part of the significant tax base for these counties. The representative just so eloquently stated that he thinks that there's safety concerns with the current pipeline. All the more reason to vote for a new pipeline that is going to be safer. There's no dispute with that. Furthermore, it was stated earlier that the origin of where the company that owns this pipeline is relevant. I failed to see that point. This pipeline is governed by the laws in this state. We know that because we're talking about this issue in this body in our state. If a company is associated or registered in any other state or any other country, that is simply not a reason not to support this bill. This is a good bill. This is good for the environment. This is good for our economy.
Member from Blue Earth, Representative Munson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise in support of this bill. This bill is great for jobs in our state. We have the pipe fitters out here supporting us. We have the steel workers. We have the 49ers. There's a lot of organizations out there that support this bill, and we need to pass this bill so Minnesotans can go back to work and transport our needed resources safely and efficiently.
Member from Carlson, Representative Sundin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find myself in an odd situation here where I have to agree with Representative Lewick on an issue, but I'll live through it, I think. But I just have to finish up on some comments here. First, I'd like to thank Bob O'Lean. Bob O'Lean is a former county commissioner in Carleton County who sat down with the parties in Carleton County, which is a county of 10,000 pipelines. They all funnel right through into Superior, Wisconsin. And Bob O'Lean helped with the routing and came to what we call peace in the valley as far as the routes go through Carleton County. It can be done if the parties sit down and talk. A week or so ago, we heard a bill that had an amendment to it to add money for collaboration with the tribes on the wild rice issue. I think we should be looking in the same direction for problem solving rather than contentious debate all the time. But I'd like to address some of the comments by Chair Fabian regarding the counties. He referred to a check for $4 million to Marshall County in Minnesota. What people should know is the rest of the story. If you remember Paul Harvey tell the rest of the story, it was actually pretty good. But there are 17 counties where in Minnesota where this proposed pipeline would travel through. And 17 counties that have pipelines right now. And the state established levy for the property taxes is being challenged in tax court. And this case is being bantered back and forth, the way I understand it, between the Supreme Court and the tax court. And this puts the state on the hook for reimbursing the counties, which would in turn have to reimburse Enbridge for overpayment of taxes, as they claim. Now, this is a pretty big bill. It's about $55 million, as I understand. And the impact on these counties is such. The $4 million check that Marshall, Minnesota got, Enbridge just wants it back. We're going to adjust that levy back to 2012. So we want our money back. So Marshall County, Minnesota is going to have to pay it back, and actually the state is on the hook to reimburse these counties. So that is somewhat the rest of the story. So let's be clear on what how great a company Enbridge is, and the impact on one county would probably dissolve the county. Clearwater County, so much of their revenue is dependent just on the property taxes paid by Enbridge. They have a large tank farm there with the pipelines coming in and out of it, and this will break the county. We refer to 87 counties here in legislature all the time. Well, we're going to have to cut that down to 86. So to pretend that Enbridge is going to keep funding these counties and do such benevolent work, I believe, Representative Chair Fabian, you are wrong.
Member from
I
Hennepin.
hope I'm wrong.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Flanagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This feels a little bit like Groundhog's Day. We continue to have debates like this on the floor. But as we're talking about the fact that this pipeline, this proposed route doesn't go through reservation communities, that's important, but it does go through 1855 territory. In 1855 territory, there's a ruling that was made that said Ojibwe people did not give up their rights to be able to hunt, fish, and gather. So that's important, and we know that tribes in 1855 territory retain those rights. I retain those rights. Others in this body retain those rights. And this would impact that, and for that reason, many of the tribes are still against this particular bill. For those of you who may not know a lot about treaties, you can go up to the third floor. There's an exhibit that's called Why Treaties Matter. I'd encourage you, if you have questions about why this bill is inappropriate, to go upstairs and take a look at that exhibit. The last thing that I would say is with regards to Enbridge supporting their employees or an employee who is pregnant in need of taking leave, I hope that that's a policy that Enbridge embraces for folks across the state, because paid family leave is something that's really critical to all of us, and I think that that would be a good thing. But the bottom line is that, again, this is about those pesky things that seem to get in the way, which again are regarded as supreme law of the land, and those are treaties. So head on up to the third floor, colleagues, take a journey with me down the Why Treaties Matter exhibit, and we can have a conversation. Vote no.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Dean R.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Of course, I'm rising to not be in support of this. There are many things that have been talked about already. You've talked about a process that's been in place for several years already. And here that process is supposed to be playing itself out in June. And yet we're going to circumvent that process because we can do that. We can write laws. And as I think about what we're doing here relative to this, I'm thinking about what does this mean to us as a legislature? Because if we're no longer going to look at a process that we currently have in place for permitting of projects like Line 3 and Enbridge, that means that we're going to have to go through the process of public hearings that are extensive. We're going to have facts presented to us in committee. And given our 120-day session, it's going to be virtually impossible for us to gain the knowledge that we need to gain in order to make a decision like this. And that's why we have the process in place that we have. Now, with all that said, what we're looking at today is we're also under the assumption that Line 3 being rebuilt is the right thing to do. That the way we're moving relative to renewals and reduction of energy that we're using, that's the right thing to do. And we've seen what's happened in other pipelines, that there's been catastrophic pipe breaks that have caused huge amounts of contamination into drinking waters. And I will go back to something that Representative Wangenius has talked about several times, is that there's over 1.5 or 2 million people who depend on the Mississippi River for their drinking water. And as a pipeline goes over, under, around, through the Mississippi River, if there's a catastrophic accident, that's going to impact that many people in the state of Minnesota. So members, I would just ask that we consider many of the factors beyond just, it would be nice for Enbridge to approve this process, who, by the way, I don't believe that Enbridge is actually asking for us to do this. So I would ask, why are we doing this? Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members, please vote no.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Becker Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first, I want to point out something about the letter that was passed around the floor from the Association of Minnesota Counties. In fact, I'm going to point out a couple things because I think some of the comments have really been misleading. If you'll notice, this letter is dated November 2nd of 2017. And while it does say Association of Minnesota Counties, and we do in fact have 87 counties, the actual letter, if anyone took the time to read it, it talks about a decision that was made at a District 3 meeting, which includes 8 counties, so not 87. And their statement was in support of the replacement project and that their statement be passed on, asked that it be forwarded to the PUC. So actually, this letter is evidence that our counties believe in the PUC process and that 8 counties had an opinion about the Line 3 project. So it's quite misleading, untruthful, in fact, to make the statement that the AMC, Association of Minnesota Counties, and all 87 counties approve of this particular bill. I also need to mention that earlier today, many of you talked about 3M. And you talked about the settlement, and you talked about the pollution of the water in the East Metro, and how important it was to protect your constituents and protect the rights of people to have access to clean water, and how important it was to be able to hold 3M accountable for the pollution from those chemicals. But if we pass this bill right here, the PUC can't put parameters on the project. They can't add parameters making sure that this company is held accountable if and when they do pollute the water. So I guess we can see how it is, and I can see now who matters to you and who doesn't. So members, finally, I'm tired. I'm tired of fighting for our treaty rights. I'm tired of fighting for wild rice to protect our Monoman. I'm tired of attempting to reason with all of you about our sovereignty and our culture and our history. And I'm tired of re-arguing proposals that we've already debated, that we already know what the outcome is going to be should this be forwarded to the governor. Asked and answered, members. We keep debating the same bills over and over, even though we know what the outcome is going to be. And I don't blame our union folks at all. I blame the people at Enbridge, who don't understand treaty obligations and don't understand or care about wild rice. And I bet our union folks will gladly remove old pipelines as well. And in fact, our union members are not asking us to pass this particular bill that's in front of us. This route is what is most economical and convenient for Enbridge, which is an international oil company. And when you say that doesn't matter, just a little while ago, we heard you talk about Minnesota companies and how important it is that we take note of those things. So it does matter, because the people who are going to benefit from this most economic and convenient route are not the people of Minnesota. And this is not what's best for our state. This route, their preferred route, was based on arrogance and a failure to understand treaty obligations. And really, we continue in this body, there's a failure to understand treaty obligations. Reservation land is not the same as treaty land. And just because we're skirting the outside of the actual reservation boundaries does not mean that our tribal communities support this project. It's disingenuous to act like that is what they want. So again, members, we don't have to go about doing it this way. I think Representative Sundin really stated eloquently how we could work together on this, and instead, the attempt with this bill is to just force everything through, despite all the public comment, despite all the Minnesotans who've participated in this PUC process that is our process and is a good process for our state. So I encourage a red vote, Gowing to Enbridge.
Member from Clearwater, Representative Grosel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And representatives, I'm listening to all the argument around the room, and, we're talking about the rails. Representative Horstein, there were no more rails that were needed to be put in, but I'll tell you what did happen. With the loss of that pipeline that should have come through, I had one business in the small town of Clearbrook where I live, one business lost $26 million in contracts. That's one business. And I have several construction businesses that operate out of that area.
Representative Grossel, hold on. Representative Grossel, when you're speaking in the chamber, make sure you're addressing the presiding officer. I know it's difficult in the front spots for you and Representative Killeen, but you do need to face the presiding officer.
Yes, sir.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hartman, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Well, you read my mind, Mr. Speaker and members. Part of the reason why we address the speaker and not turn and point at each other and address individuals is to make sure that what we're debating is the bill and not personality. So I would appreciate if members would observe the rule.
You are correct, Representative Hartman. That is the first time I've ever read your mind. Representative Grossel, again, just a reminder to all members of the body that you are supposed to address the presiding officer. You were very close, Representative Grossel. You're kind of at a 45-degree angle, but so please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those are jobs. Those are jobs lost. That's incomes that will not come back. Incomes for many families. Not to mention the loss of tax base. That would go to a repayment of money that was overtaxed to Enbridge. This caused many companies to be delayed in putting people back to work. Many families that didn't have a full income for that construction season. Many families in a very diverse area. Enbridge employs a very diverse base, including, but not limited to, a lot of Indigenous men and women who work in the trades unions. As a matter of fact, welders, pipe fitters, heavy equipment operators depend on these jobs to stay in Minnesota with their families. A very diverse array of workers and subcontractors. Their families depend on these jobs. The tax base that these pipelines bring also helps these towns, emergency services, schools, and other programs that affect all our constituents. Not just in my district, but right across the line. I'm tired, just like Representative Becker-Finn, I'm tired of this conversation. I'm tired of hearing the same thing over and over again. We have had the best wild rice harvests in many years. We've got the purest water in all of the Mississippi, in our area. And it remains that way, even with 6 pipelines running underneath it. I'm tired of the people living in my district having jobs denied and jobs delayed to a very diverse population who depend on construction work to take care of their families. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a green vote on this bill.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Becker-Finn yield for a question?
She will. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Becker-Finn, when people in this chamber hand out letters of support, is there a date or a rule in our book that states about when something expires?
Member from Ramsey, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know off the top of my head, Representative Smith.
Representative Smith.
Mr. Speaker, will Representative Becker Finn yield for a question?
She will. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Becker Finn, you stated in your statement before that because this letter from the Association of Minnesota Counties was dated November 2nd, 2017, that it somehow invalidated or made this letter not as relevant, and I was wondering why you thought that.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Becker Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My point in speaking to it, Representative Smith, was that you were incorrect when you stated that all 87 counties and the Association of Minnesota Counties supported this bill. That is not what the letter said. What the date is more or less irrelevant. I will read again that what the letter actually says is that 8 counties asked that their statement in support of the project be forwarded to the PUC, which would mean going through the process.
Representative Smith.
Mr. Speaker, will Representative Becker Finn yield for a question?
She will. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Becker Finn, so do you have a letter from the Association of Minnesota Counties from the 79 counties not represented on this letter stating that they disagree with District 3's decision?
Representative Becker Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do not. I would point out, however, Representative Smith, that logic is quite flawed, and we don't know where they stand, and I never stated that we did. I simply stated that when you said all 87 counties were in support of this bill or this project, you were incorrect.
Representative Smith.
Mr. Speaker, will Representative Becker Finn yield for a question?
She will. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Becker Finn, you implied that because the Association of Minnesota Counties represents 87 and only 8 are represented from District 3, that the rest of the counties don't represent the views of this letter. I think it's reasonable, I'm wondering if you do, that the Association of Minnesota Counties would date a letter dated a long time ago, according to your earlier statement, back in November of 2017, plenty of time for everyone to see it, implying that they don't represent this view, and I think they do, and I'm wondering how you can square that away.
Representative Becker Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To be clear, I was not implying anything to that. More than implied, I stated and will continue to state that it was misleading at best for you to state that all 87 counties agreed with the statement contained in this letter.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, when any association or any organization submits a letter to this body, as they do on many bills every day that we're in here, they represent that entire organization. And I do not believe that the Association of Minnesota Counties would put out a letter with their name on it saying that they don't represent this view. It is true that 8 counties from District 3 voted on this, but I find it highly improbable that the Association of Minnesota Counties, a reputable organization, would submit this letter to us if they did not support this measure. Thank you.
Member from Manilman, Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to clarify a couple of things that have been said here today. For one thing, Representative Sundin, I want to thank him for bringing up Clearwater County. The property taxes that they would have to make up would be the equivalent of their year's budget. But it's not Enbridge that will be asking for that to be repaid. That's the Minnesota Department of Revenue that will be asking that to be repaid. The other thing I want to let this body know is that as a member of White Earth, there is a program there. It's TARO, and it's not just White Earth, but it's the Tribal Employment Rights Ordinance, I should say, ordinance. And with that, any jobs that are within so many miles of the reservation, they have to hire tribal members. And as a member and someone who knows members and lives with them, they're very encouraged about the fact that if this line does go through, tribal members will be hired on this line. And these are much needed jobs. Back to the other thing on the counties, this line did everything it could to avoid the reservations, crossing reservation land, and these are some of the poorest counties in Minnesota, and they've come to rely on this. This is our schools It's our county social services. It's our police departments. It's everything that our property taxes goes for. And they benefit everybody across racial lines. So this is a good thing for us, for the whole northern community and all the way over to Duluth. And so I hope you'll support this bill.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if Representative Smith would yield to a question. I'm not sure if he maybe exited the floor.
He will.
Oh, no, there he is. Okay.
He will yield.
Thank you.
Representative Pinto.
Not sure where I was looking, Representative Smith. My apologies. Representative Smith, do you have a letter from the remaining 81 counties, or pardon me, 79 counties, I guess, Association of Minnesota Counties, expressing support of the project? Since I know that the letter that was handed out said specifically that these 8 county commissioners in attendance approved the motion below and asked that it be forwarded.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, I do not have a letter, but the fact that one does not exist doesn't mean the entire association doesn't support it. When the president, Mr. Gary Hendricks, is copied on the letter, by virtue of them using this letterhead, the entire association represents the view of District 3. To say anything different is simply misleading.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So members, I guess I want to point out, the letter says that these county commissioners approve the motion below and ask that it be forwarded to the PUC. If the AMC had not forwarded this, that would be the strange thing. They were simply asked to forward it to the PUC. It's my understanding that the Association of Minnesota Counties is in fact neutral with respect to this proposal. If somebody has different information, please speak up about that. The fact that 8 counties said that they approve it, that's fair enough. I really want to make sure that we're clear that that does not say anything about the other 79 counties that are represented. They were asked to forward it on to the PUC, continuing the process, and what, of course, this proposal would do would be to take it out of the hands of the PUC, and thereby go against what was asked to be done. As long as we're talking about counties, I guess I thought that I heard Representative Grossell say, and if Representative Grossell would yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Pinto.
And Representative Grossell, I may have misunderstood you, but I thought I heard you say that you feel that Enbridge may in fact be overtaxed by the counties that it operates in, or that it pays property taxes that are very high. Just want to see if you could comment on that. Do you feel that Enbridge is overtaxed when it comes to Beltrami and Clearwater and the other counties in which it operates?
Member from Clearwater, Representative Grossell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Pinto, the last that I was informed that there was a lawsuit in reference to the Minnesota Department of Revenue was that they used a formula that was not used in the surrounding states, and a previous lawsuit that another outfit filed against the state was won by that organization. So Enbridge, seeing that the one company that had been overtaxed won their lawsuit, and feeling that they were being overtaxed as well because none of the states around us uses the same formula as the Department of Revenue, they figured they should probably follow suit to make sure that this is lined up with how it should be.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I guess if Representative Grossell will just yield to one more question.
He will. Representative Pinto.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Grossell, so I guess are you expressing the view then that Enbridge is in fact overtaxed as to the counties or as to the state? I just want to make sure I understand.
Representative Grossell.
Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
If you give me enough time, I'll find the point of order, but I'm pretty sure that we have in the Masons Manual an issue where you're not allowed to ask a member questions of personal opinion. And if you give me a little time, I'll find it. Otherwise, I can ask a point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, do we have a rule in Mason's Manual that says that you can't question a member's personal opinion? Would that be 253, Mr. Speaker?
Well, let me do some research and find out, Representative Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, I found the point of order.
State your point of order, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to point of order 253 in Mason's Manual, and I stand for advice.
Representative Anderson rises to a point of order under Masons 2.53, I believe you said. Representative Anderson, to your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The presiding officer should never permit a speaker to be heckled by questions, nor permit a member to present arguments under the guise of questions. A member should not be permitted to interrupt a speaker to ask questions of other members unless some urgent reason exists. I think what Representative Pinto is doing here is exactly that, which is a violation of Mason's manual, and I ask you to support my point of order.
Thank you, Representative Anderson. As has been the custom and usage of this body, I will defer ruling on the point of order and simply remind members that it is never a bad time to review Masons or our House rules in terms of the legislative guidance. Representative Pinto, you have asked a question. Representative Grossell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if you'd be so kind, Representative Pinto, would you repeat the question?
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Grossell, I was just seeking to have you clarify what you'd said before. Are you expressing the view that you believe that Enbridge is in fact overtaxed relative to the counties of the state? Just trying to clarify that. Thank you.
And I believe you asked him to yield, and he will yield, Representative Grossell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Pinto, according to the lawsuit, that is what they believe.
Representative Kunesh-Podein.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important that we look at this bill and what this bill is really about. This bill, the title is Exempt Enbridge Line 3 from Regulatory Approval. So in April, Administrative Law Judge Ann O'Reilly recommended that Enbridge's application for certification of need from Line 3 replacement be approved. So she approved it, but she approved it with the stipulation that it had to replace the exact same Line 3. It could not create a new route. It couldn't use the larger pipes. It wouldn't be able to run the quantity of the tar sands through it. And there are folks, probably Enbridge and many other people, that were not pleased with that response. And so now we have this bill. This bill does not seek to improve the PUC review process, but it certainly tilts the success of Enbridge in its favor. I think a couple people have pointed out we have no letter of support here from Enbridge for this bill, and we're talking about this bill. We don't have letters of support from our tradesmen, the pipe fitters, or those folks. And so I think their message is clear that this bill is an irresponsible bill. This is a bill that is inappropriate in the fact that it wants to exclude regulatory control for one company. If this bill were to pass, it would preclude the ability for the PUC to attach conditions to the certificate of need or the route permit. Those conditions would require Enbridge to clean up any oil spills and train first responders in the case of a large spill or explosion. That means that they would not have the regulations as far as how to clean up a spill. And if you were to just Google Enbridge spills, you would come up with so many headlines of really extraordinary spills that are the responsibility of Enbridge. One is Enbridge pipeline leaks 200,000 liters of oil condensate in one of the counties of Alaska. Spills on the aging Enbridge pipeline have topped 1 million gallons. Safety Board links Enbridge oil leak to the lack of detailed inspection procedures. About 3,000 liters made it from the berm into a nearby creek due to an Enbridge oil spill. Enbridge Line 5 has spilled at least 1.1 million gallons of their oil in the last 50 years. If this gets a green light, that means there are no regulations about how Enbridge is to clean up their mess. It also allows the legislature to once again impose itself on the ultimate decision making in a very complicated and controversial project. despite the existing expertise and the familiarity with the facts. We are not the experts on this. We should not be making those decisions. That is the responsibility of the Public Utility Commission. This bill ignores the volumes of EIS and other scientific evidence on the merits of the pipeline and the optimal routes. This bill also is sending a message to Minnesotans that their voices do not matter. Thousands and thousands of people have come to the Twin Cities, to their local county governments, to meeting after meeting, expressing their concerns and the fact that no, they don't want it in their backyard. None of us want that thing running through our backyard. Why would we have to make them? And again, we are disregarding their voice and their decision. The final decision by the PUC on their certificate of need and the route permit is only 1 month away. Why is it so important that we rush this through in the final days of the legislature? We are here to support policy and procedure. And I'm not going to lie, I've been really surprised and pretty dumbfounded by the lack of following policy and procedure in the last 2 years at the legislature. When folks want to ask me about how things work here at the legislature, I just have to shake my head and I tell them it's not like what you think. It's not like what we have in our curriculum when we want to teach kids civics and responsibility and how a bill becomes a law. We don't play by the rules. It's important for something as important as this pipeline and the decision making of the environment for every person in Minnesota, that we follow the policies and the procedures that are put in place for the safety of our environment. So undoing all of this, or what this will do, will undo all in a one-page bill, and that sends to the rest of Minnesota a really terrible message. So I call on you to oppose this irresponsible bill, signaling respect to Minnesota for the necessity to procedure in the final approval to Line 3, and allow for the suggestions or the final findings of the PUC in June.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just wanted to clarify that, blanket statements about who might get the jobs associated with this pipeline. We know we've had letters passed out because we've debated this so many times. We've had the letters passed out. I'm sorry I didn't waste paper this time around, but we know that the Chippewa tribe, we know that Leech Lake, their governments, those sovereign governments, are against this particular route. And so the idea that pushing this particular bill through is somehow in the name of protecting jobs for Native folks is quite disingenuous. Vote no.
Member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. My good friend from Carlton County said earlier that the state is on the hook if Enbridge wins in court, which I believe they will, but the state is not on the hook for the counties and towns. They would have a responsibility for some CI and some school levy, just to correct the record.
Member from St. Louis, Representative Murphy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fabian, I've been following this issue for the last few years from the point that the present line goes through a little part of my district, or did go through a larger part of my district previously. And we've used the words today on the floor about replacement and rebuild and the new Line 3. And I would just, for curiosity and settlement in my mind, need to know, if you know, with the new Line 3 and the passage of this bill, would the old line stay in the ground or come out of the ground? And some areas are very close, I understand, to being the same. But I don't understand the words rebuilt, new, replacement. And is it a totally new pipes in new area? And what happens to the pipes that are laying in the grounds now?
Excuse me, I don't believe did she ask him to yield, Representative Murphy? He will yield. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Murphy, thank you for the question, because it is a point of clarification. The existing plan that Enbridge has submitted is to put the new pipe in the ground in the easement that currently exists, all the way to Clearbrook, Minnesota. The old pipe will be left in the ground and decommissioned. At Clearbrook, the pipe will follow an existing easement and traverse to the south, and then it will go to the east over to Duluth and Superior. When I talked before about the reason for not taking the other pipe out of the ground, it's because if you take that pipe out of the ground and put a new one in the existing trench, either way, you're going to have to move a significant amount of heavy equipment over the pipes that are in the ground that are moving petroleum. And Enbridge is extremely concerned about the heavy equipment, track hose, dump trucks, you name it, traveling across the ground with those pipes underneath them. So in order to avoid doing damage to those pipes along that path, they want to decommission the pipeline. And I might add, members, that there are a significant number of miles of pipeline in the country, across the country, that have been decommissioned and left in the ground. They will be thoroughly cleaned and they will be left in the ground. I'm not exactly sure what would happen in the future, but the current plan is to leave those in the ground because they do not want to disturb the other pipes there. So they'll be working on the outside of the other pipes that are currently in the ground to avoid damage to the other pipes that are hauling different types of products at this time.
Representative, thank you. The member from Isanti, Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It's been interesting to watch this debate over the last few months and few years. You know, I can remember a time when Democrats in this state supported jobs, but it seems like that day has passed. My brother is a 49er, and I see the hard hat unions out in the hallways out here advocating for these jobs. What we're talking about here is a $3 billion private investment. And I'm going to say that again in a few minutes, but I'll let it sink in. A $3 billion private investment. You remember that the Viking Stadium, which was $1 billion, you all thought that was such a great idea that you paid for half of it. This is a $3 billion private investment. It's like 6,000 jobs in the state of Minnesota. And what will happen to them? We know what will happen to them. Because we were all here when the Sandpiper pipeline was supported to death by our governor. And I can't tell you how many times our governor said publicly that he supported the Sandpiper pipeline, which was a similar investment. But Enbridge said, you know what? We can only be slow-rolled long enough. We're going to invest in the Dakota Access Pipeline, which, by the way, right now is pumping oil. And those jobs, I got to tell you, if you haven't looked at a map to see where the Dakota Access Pipeline goes, take a look at it. It literally goes right around the state of Minnesota, through North Dakota, South Dakota, across the Minnesota-Iowa border, within yards of the border. And what did we lose? Thousands of good-paying jobs. Thousands of union jobs. But today on this floor, it's Republicans who are going to stand up for those union jobs, not Democrats. Thousands of those jobs. And not only that, property tax revenue. I could ask a few members to yield to ask how much property tax revenue their counties and cities and school districts lost because that pipeline didn't go across. I'm looking at Representative Heinzman nod his head. I think it would have been a 20% increase in the property taxes collected in Crow Wing County alone. Just think of the public, the public service, the firefighters and police officers that could have been hired. Just think of the boon to the school districts in that area. Or they could have chosen to reduce property taxes for homeowners. But we didn't get that. And you know who got the jobs? North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa. That's the problem, members. We can create all these false narratives and pit this group of people against that group of people. Or we can choose to support the people who are here in the hallways, who put on hard hats and go to work every day. We can choose together to support their jobs for Minnesotans right here in this state. Or you can vote against them and try to pit this group of Minnesotans against that group. They want these jobs. They want this private investment in this state. Oh yeah, it was the Obama administration that said we should replace this pipeline. That's how controversial it is. But let's not miss an opportunity to pit this group of people against that one and try to kill this in the name of the environment. I'm tired of the false choice. We don't have to choose jobs or the environment. We can actually do both. Everybody knows these pipelines are the safest way to transport oil in the state. The safest way. And instead, you're not stopping the oil from coming. It might feel good. You might tell the protesters that show up here once in a while that you're doing something really great, but you're not stopping any oil from coming out of the ground. They're putting it on the rails and driving it right next to your elementary schools and right next to your nursing homes, right through small towns all across the state. And not just small towns, it comes right here through the metro. The oil's coming out of the ground. You're not going to stop it. What you're going to do is stop the jobs, and you're going to stop the property tax revenue. That's what you're stopping. All in the name of the environment. It's not a choice. With technology today, we can protect the environment and we can create jobs. And I'm so damn proud to stand here and tell you that I'm glad that my party is the one that's standing up for those jobs and knows that you can protect the environment. Speaker doesn't speak very often on the House floor, right? I noticed it got kind of quiet in here. But you know what? I'm going to be the one who stands up for those jobs. And I'm going to ask each one of you, when that board opens up and those lights start lighting up, are you going to stand up for jobs in this state? Or are you going to send them to North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Illinois? That's your choice. And when you leave this chamber today, I want you to look at the people in the face out there who want these jobs and want this investment and tell them that you didn't have their back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Let's talk about jobs. Should we talk about jobs? We had a vote on jobs today in this chamber. We voted on half of a bonding bill. Governor Mark Dayton put out a bonding bill with 23,000 jobs in it. This House said, oh no, we don't want thousands of jobs. We want half that many jobs. We're going to put up a bonding bill with half as much investment in the state of Minnesota. Let's talk about teaching jobs, shall we? A bunch of teachers across the state of Minnesota are facing layoffs. We have a budget surplus. We could do something about that. We could prevent those teachers from getting laid off. But when Governor Dayton proposes supplemental education funding, what's the response from Republicans? Well, Republican leader Paul Gazelka today said, let's take the pensions of 600,000 Minnesotans and play games with that. Hardworking people who put money away for retirement. Oh, Governor, not only do I not want to do your education funding proposal, I'm going to play politics with the retirement savings of 600,000 Minnesotans. So, Representative Daudt, I will give you that there are jobs associated with building a pipeline. There are about 4,000 construction jobs associated with building that pipeline. Today, the House passed a bonding bill that said no to 10,000 jobs. And you want to pretend that because you're for 4,000 jobs, which are going to happen anyway, when the PUC decides where and when this pipeline will be built, you want to pretend that because you're for those 4,000 jobs, somehow you're Mr. Jobs. You really care about working people in Minnesota. Well, you know who knows working people in Minnesota? Minnesota's labor unions. The ones who fight for working families every single day in and day out. And they've judged your performance for working families in Minnesota. They've given you 0%, 6%, 5%. One year you got as high as 17%. The working families of Minnesota have not given Minnesota's Republicans or their leader a passing grade, and that's because they can see through this crap. Enbridge is not asking for this bill. Labor unions are not asking for this bill. Communities are not asking for this bill. This bill is a big show, a big pretend show, on the very day this body said no to 10,000 jobs for working people in Minnesota. It wants to say yes to 4,000 that we all agree, many of us agree, are coming to the state, and try to cover up for the fact that you just said no to 10,000. You know, Minnesotans aren't that stupid. When you went and put a voter ID amendment on the ballot, Minnesotans said, you know what, we're not that dumb. We're not going to pass that. It will deny people the right to vote. And here you are, back again, insulting people's intelligence, trying to make it sound like you actually care about working families when they know you don't.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
God, I had hoped not to get up and speak on this bill today. It was so much fun the last time. And it was almost as much fun the last time as it was the time before. But I'd like to remind Representative Daudt, when he's on the floor, that his argument should be made to the Speaker, not to me. Because Representative Daudt does not know how I feel about this particular bill or how I'm going to vote on this particular bill. So he should make his arguments to the Speaker. But I will say this about this bill, Mr. Speaker. Labor has no place on this bill, as the Minority Leader alluded to. They're neutral. Enbridge is neutral. This is a problem for them almost. I don't support this bill for the reasons that this bill takes away the ability to negotiate. A number of years ago, we were having serious problems with oil tankers leaking. And we made them go to double wall. A number of years ago, a couple years ago I think it was, we started, or the federal government required oil tankers on rail lines to double wall. We could have asked Enbridge to double wall their pipeline. See, I'm a pipe fitter, and I do know that a pipe fits inside of a pipe. And you can put pressure sensors in the interior pipe, and moisture and liquid sensors in the exterior pipe. We actually do that once in a while. And as a pipe fitter, that'd be great because it's a little more work. But we don't have, with this bill, that the governor, if anyone has been listening, Mr. Speaker, if anyone has been listening, the governor has been exceedingly clear what he thinks of this bill and the ability or the attempt for Representative Fabian to take power away from the PUC where they have scientists. I know we all think we're scientists, but we're not. So to end this, what I don't understand is that PUC has clearly indicated that they will have a ruling on this by the end of June. So for anyone to question my commitment to organized labor and the jobs that it brings to this pipeline or to this state would be ridiculous, would be insulting, would be, well, I better not say that on the House floor. I can't. Okay, I'll go ahead and do it, they're saying. So let's see, I'm just going to repeat it here. Labor and Enbridge are neutral or don't really care about this bill. We're going to lose all of our ability with this bill to negotiate safety. We're not going to lose any jobs with this bill or for or against this bill. And the governor has announced, has signaled his intentions, and the PUC has said they're going to rule in 30 days. But now they don't have to rule, or this bill doesn't go into effect until, what is it, the end of the year, next year? So, having heard it the third time, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Members, as someone who has spent 20 years fighting for jobs for people in this state, as a construction worker, as a pipe fitter, I'm going to vote against this bill. And I'm going to be proud to vote against this bill because I think it hinders what we can get.
The author of the bill from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I appreciate the spirited debate. Well, let me start out by saying this is my bill. I am the chief author, and I'm fighting for my constituents. I have been to the meetings in northern Minnesota, and I can tell you unequivocally, oops, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, am I supposed to, I can't do this, looking straight at you all the time, but I mean, that's just too hard to do, looking at you all the time, Mr. Speaker, but.
Seeing no further discussion, Representative Fabian, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When someone said that communities don't support this bill, I can tell you unequivocally, the communities that I represent, they support this. We have stood around for 4 years and watched the slothful regulatory process take place in Minnesota. It takes way too long to get to a decision. And members, you know, I have been working on regulatory reform, environmental review, permitting, and so forth since 2011 when I first got here. We have got to do something to speed this process up. You say that labor is neutral on this, you know, members, maybe officially they might be, but I can tell you unequivocally that the labor people that wear a hard hat, that drive a truck, that run a track hoe, that weld the pipes together, these are new, high-tech, super safe pipes. The people who work on these projects, they're bugging me. Dan, what do we need to do to get this approved? This started, members, back 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when we were considering the sandpiper that Speaker Daudt referred to. And we lost the sandpiper, which would have been worth billions of dollars of investment in the state of Minnesota. and thousands of jobs. And the economic impact on commerce in small communities from the Minnesota-North Dakota border to Duluth Superior is really significant. And I've talked about this before. Representative Kunesh-Bodin talked about an aging pipeline. You know something? You're right. It is an aging pipeline. It needs to be replaced. Would you rather have a pipe in the ground with old technology and old welds and old walls that are 50 or 60 years old? Or would you rather have pipe in the ground that's new pipe, that may be made from Minnesota steel off the Iron Range? And to suggest that this bill is going to do something about how you clean up a spill, should it happen, that's not correct, members. We talked about Sandpiper briefly. Guess where the Sandpiper pipeline was going to go that Governor Dayton supported? Guess what the route was when it got to Clearbrook? The route that Enbridge prefers today. And that's a part of the reason why that is the route, is because it went through an environmental impact statement. And it went through that process. That's why that route is being chosen in this bill. And to suggest that somehow, and quote, if this bill passes, something's going to happen. That's not true. And we all know that. In order for something to happen, guess what? It needs a signature. Representative Mahoney talked about scientists over at the PUC. Well, and we're not scientists. You know something? I am not a rocket scientist by any stretch of the imagination, nor am I a pipeline scientist. But the PUC members are not scientists either, members. They're people that are not a lot different than you and I. But who do they rely on for their information? Other people that work for the PUC. Or maybe it's an engineering firm. Who do we rely on for information to validate our positions? The same types of situations. And Representative Hornstein, you talked about Enbridge spending $5 million, not billion, but million. My side of the aisle loves to hear me say billion, but I'm not. You can't lobby the PUC. You can't lobby them. It's against the rules, it's against the law. I've lost my notes here, I'm sorry. But it's called, and Representative Smith would know this better than me, they're ex parte rules. You cannot lobby a judge, you can't lobby a PUC member during this time that something is being decided. You can't do it. And I've got the statute here, because there's some smart people around here that help us figure things out. I appreciate people talking about rural counties. Guess what? I've got the letter here from Joe Bovet, Kitson County Commissioner, who is part of the AMC District 3. You know, members, and I told this from the very beginning when we started this in the Jobs Committee, I'm doing this because I'm representing my constituents. Well, guess what? A significant part of AMC District 3 is my district. I'm representing my constituents. This is something that they see a great deal of value in. And why? Why does the AMC District 3 support Line 3? For a combination of reasons, quote, including but not limited to need, increased safety, improved reliability and efficiency, established sound environmental review, and the importance of the line as a significant percentage of county tax base. How many miles of pipelines do we have in the United States? 2.4 million miles. There are 2.4 million miles of pipelines in the ground in the United States. And we talk about policy and procedure. Well, guess what? Some of these procedures, from my perspective, take far too long. We need to figure out a way to speed things up. And Representative Kunesh-Podein said that voices don't matter. Well, guess what? The voices of the people in District 1A matter a great deal to me. The voices of the people across northern Minnesota matter a great deal to me. In this bill, I responded to a concern that Representative Dabney raised in the Jobs Committee. Along the preferred route that Enbridge would like to build, where they are proposing to build the pipeline, it creates some flexibility to work so that they can make some variances there. So, members, for me, this is a bill whose time has come. If the PUC had announced that they would make the decision in April or May, we probably wouldn't be doing this. But I feel very strongly about respectfully sending a message to the Public Utilities Commission that this is important to Minnesota. It's important to Representative Fabian. It's important to his constituents. And I got a feeling we're going to see a lot of green on the board that indicates that it's important to an awful lot of people all across the state of Minnesota. And with that, I will wave my pencil and I'm done. I encourage a green vote. Thank you, members.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 74 ayes and 51 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to.